Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Wolfson, you've done some outstanding work on supporting independent workers, freelancers who comprise about a third of the American population at this point. That number's fairly likely to grow. I think it's very important that right now we take advantage of the opportunity to put protections for independent workers into statute, which is why I've introduced the Modern Worker Empowerment Act, Modern Worker Security Act, which I know you mentioned in your introduction. So before getting into that, though, would you mind just giving us a brief recap of the effect that the attacks on independent workers have had in California with AB 5, as your institute has shown, and then the threat posed by the Biden administration's effort to sort of mimic that legislation?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think the key thing to remember is after California passed AB 5, a number of businesses, including businesses that no one would consider the businesses that Mr. Cesar is calling or abusing their workers. The New York Times told photographers, freelance writers in California they wouldn't work with them anymore because they didn't want to have to provide the benefits that California was going to require them to provide those workers for just a small amount of work. And so people in the film industry, people in lots of industries who are making significant sums of money lost their positions. And so people in your district were losing their jobs. Truckers were told you are no longer going to be allowed to move products from the ports out of the ports, including when we had massive port challenges of moving goods during COVID. We had people who were unable to move those goods because those workers knew the risks and the benefits that they were taking upon themselves in starting the business. And then California's legislature came in and they said, we're not going to allow you to make that decision anymore. We're going to protect you from yourself. We're going to protect you from making money because we think we know better what your relationship with another business ought to look like. And the reality is we don't do that in most places in America. We would allow an individual who wants to contract with someone to do work at their house to hire who they choose to work with and to come to an arrangement for how much that's going to cost. If suddenly anybody who was coming to do HVAC work at my house, I had to provide them with, I was legally required to provide them with the same employee benefits that workers who work with me at the Cicero Institute receive from our organization, that would change the entire calculus of how much I'm willing to pay them, what I'm willing to pay them, what I'm willing to do. And we need to allow people to have those interactions. And so I thank you for proposing those bills. I think both of those bills will go a long way toward helping workers in states across the country who want to be independent workers to be able to be independent workers, to work with those businesses and not discourage those businesses from hiring them.
Absolutely. And so one of the bills seeks to actually provide a clear sort of common law-based standard for being an independent worker, which is what has prevailed in this country for a very long time. Of course, the Trump administration had a similar standard in its first instantiation, which this legislation essentially seeks to restore, but to do so in a durable way so that we don't have the uncertainty that comes with the new administration coming in, potentially changing the rules. But then the other bill deals with this topic of portable benefits that you've written a lot about. So could you just tell us a little more about what those are and why under current law sometimes employers or I should say hiring entities are discouraged from offering them to independent workers?
Yeah, so as Ms. McCutcheon mentioned, one of the factors at the very end of the Wage and Hour Division's rule on independent contracting, that's the current regulation that's obviously being challenged right now, but the one from the last administration explicitly says we can consider whatever additional factors we want to. But one of the factors that has traditionally been considered in deciding whether a worker is an employee or not is whether there's benefits that are provided to those workers. And your bill would explicitly say that the mere provision of access to benefits, if that is the arrangement that the worker and the hiring entity want to do, is not going to be considered as a factor in determining whether that person's an employee. So I'll give you an example. If an individual worker has a spouse who has, as I mentioned earlier, a health savings account or a retirement account, and their employer does not fill the entire account, but they would prefer to have the tax preferences of having those dollars put into the health savings account. Maybe they recognize that they can actually save tax dollars by putting it in the account from the business directly, and then they don't have any of the business taxes that Mr. Cesar is worried about. In those circumstances, right now, if they put that money in, if the business puts money into the health savings account, so you have a business in town that asks someone to do computer repair for them on an independent basis, they put money in that health savings account, right now, that could be a factor that the Labor Department considers employment, even though the worker will benefit by getting the tax preferences of putting that money directly into the health savings account. And so that's what the portable benefits concept is allow workers to have an arrangement with the hiring entity to put dollars into those accounts so that the worker can get the benefits from those types of retirement and other types of savings accounts. And the business can interact in the relationship in the best way that gives both the worker and the business the relationship that they want.
Yeah, it's a total win-win. I mean, under current law, the dynamic you describe is sort of a no good deed goes unpunished. Whereas if you want to provide this level of security and benefits to an independent worker, then that might cause, the entire relationship to be recharacterized in a way that's in neither the interest of the hiring entity or of the worker. And so what we're trying to do is provide a safe harbor to prevent that from happening. Thanks so much for your work on this topic. I yield back.